Welcome to another historical fiction author chat, and I'm very excited to present to you Janie Chang and her beautiful new novel, The Porcelain Moon. Look how beautiful that is. I love that. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
coming, Janie.
Thank you for inviting me. And yes, I just want to say that I feel like I've been really, really lucky with all my book covers.
Oh, yes. It's so magical, that one. I mean, look at the colors. I don't know if the screens will do that justice. Janie and I were talking about lighting in this Zoom thing, and I don't think it can do justice, but they're beautiful. This is your fourth book, right? Your fourth?
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
It is.
beautiful. All right. So on with the show here. I will read you Janie's bio and then the synopsis, and then it's over to her.
Simply.
Janie Chang writes historical fiction, often with a personal connection, drawing from a family history with 36 generations of recorded genealogy. That is so dreamy. She grew up listening to stories about life in a small Chinese town in the years before Second World War and tales of ancestors who encountered dragons, ghosts, and immortals. Janie is a graduate of the Writers Studio at Simon Fraser University. She was the founder and main organizer of Authors for Indies, which I was a part of, a 100% volunteer staffed event that promoted a national day of support by Canadian authors for Canada's independent bookstores. The event ran from 2015 to 2017 and transitioned to Canadian Independent Bookstore Day. It's a fantastic idea to support the independent bookstores. I love it. Born in Taiwan, Janie has lived in the Philippines, Iran, Thailand, and New Zealand. She now lives with her husband on the beautiful Sunshine Coast of British Columbia. So back to the cold. Well, you're not that cold out there, are you?
It's about 5 degrees right now.
Okay, all right. Well, it's better than mine, but I think New Zealand would be really nice right now.
Well, we did think about New Zealand when my husband retired because he's from New Zealand. And then we thought that, we've been in Vancouver and we have so many friends here. And we both really love the Sunshine Coast every time we drove through. So we thought, well, let's look at housing here. And then this house popped up and and we bought it and we moved, and I was in the middle of writing a novel when it happened. If you people watching this think that there seem to be a lot of packing boxes behind me, there are. Not done yet. This is my temporary office until the renovations are done and I actually get like a real writing studio and a library set up.
Well, I'm very grateful that you battled your way through the boxes to come on here and chat with us. I'm going to read the synopsis now of The Porcelain Moon, which the poetry of the way you write, I think that's what gets me the most. It's so, you can take readers away. It's beautiful. A vividly rendered novel set in World War I France about two young women, one Chinese, one French, whose lives intersect with unexpected, potentially dangerous consequences. France, 1918. In the final days of the First World War, a young Chinese woman, Pauline Deng, runs away from her uncle's home in Paris to evade a marriage that will send her back to Shanghai. To prevent the union, she needs the help of her cousin Theo, who has been working as a translator for the Chinese labor corps in the town of Noyelles-sur-Mer. In Noyelles-sur-Mer, Camille Roussel, is that right? Do you think? Camille
Yes.
Roussel is planning her escape from an abusive marriage. When Camille offers Pauline a place to stay while she's in Noyelles, the two women become friends. But it's not long before Pauline uncovers a perilous love affair that Camille has been hiding and the truth about Theo. As their situation escalates into deadly danger, the two women are forced to make a terrible decision that will bind them together for the rest of their lives. Set against the little known history of the 140,000 Chinese workers brought to Europe as non combatant labor during World War I, The Porcelain Moon is a tale of forbidden love, identity, and belonging, and what we are willing to risk for freedom. Beautiful. I have so much to talk to you about this, so I'm just going to disappear now and come back later. And now I'm going to listen to you read. So thank you.
Right. I got my timer on so that I won't go over. Okay. I'm gonna read from the first chapter of the book, Saturday, November 2nd, 1918. Pauline. But I don't want to get married, she thought. The letter fell from her hand and fluttered to the floor of the study, the neat precision of her uncle's brushstroke Chinese writing at odds with the chaos that churned her insides. Pauline didn't reach down to retrieve it, just stared at the sheet of paper as though it were some malevolent creature, a serpent or venomous spider lying on the wooden parquet. Her uncle's first wife was now in control of her fate. First wife who had never wanted her in their household. First wife whose expression visibly curdled whenever she looked at Pauline. Her uncle had murmured occasionally about writing to first wife in Shanghai about arranging a match for Pauline, but in his absent-minded way, he'd never followed through. Not until now. Now, because he was back in China for grandfather Deng's funeral. Now, because while he was there, he remembered to ask first wife to hire a matchmaker for Pauline, his dead brother's illegitimate daughter. Pauline's gaze fell on a tall vase in the corner, its glazed surface painted with a folk tale she knew well. The Lady Chang escaping from a cruel husband, her robe streaming in the wind as she ascends the night sky toward a full moon. Her right hand is raised, pointing to her destination, a porcelain woman reaching for a porcelain moon. The air in Pauline's lungs felt chokingly thick. She threw open the study window, oblivious to the frigid November wind that slashed at her throat and swept papers off the desk. She leaned out as far as the wrought iron window guards allowed and let the familiar noises of life on the Rue de Lisbonne seep into her consciousness. Impatient delivery trucks sounding their horns, two women laughing as they strolled together, their children trailing behind them, chattering like sparrows. The street lamps that gave Paris its nickname, the City of Lights, glimmered brightly as the sun sank lower. When Pauline finally took a deep breath, she drew in aromas of baking, the bistro on the corner preparing its evening meal. She retreated to the chair, ran one fingertip over the polished surface of the rosewood desk, and rearranged her uncle's writing brushes on the lacquered stand. She waited for her heartbeat to calm. Then she gathered up the papers the wind had blown about on the floor and stacked them under a paperweight. There had to be a way to avoid the fate outlined for her in that letter. Her dowry was meager, her prospects equally so. She knew what sort of match to expect. She might end up a shopkeeper's second wife, worked to death and at the mercy of a resentful first wife. Or first wife might pair her with an elderly widower who wanted an unpaid nursemaid. But worse than anything, whatever future first wife was arranging for her right now, it would send Pauline back to China, far away from everything she loved. She didn't want to leave Paris, not this apartment with its tall French doors and high ceilings, or the neighbors along the Rue de Lisbonne, not La Pagode, the store her uncle owned and all its beautiful antiques. She hurried down to the ground floor and along the corridor that led to the back of La Pagode. The store was closed most of the time now. Few wanted to buy antiques while a war was going on. Once inside, she looked around as if to assure herself everything was as she'd left it that morning. There wasn't a single object in this store Pauline hadn't cleaned and polished, no display she hadn't arranged, composing pieces into enticing vignettes. After all these years at La Pagode, she could tell the difference between an ancient jade disc from the Han Dynasty and an imitation one carved only 300 years ago. She knew what every antique cost her uncle and how to price it. If only Theo were here. Theo, her cousin, who was like a brother to her. His Chinese name, Deng Taoling, made foreign tongues stumble, so it didn't take long for their Parisian neighbors to call him Theo instead, just as she became Pauline Deng instead of Deng Baoling, just as her uncle gave himself a French name when he printed up La Pagode's business cards, Louis Deng, proprietor. At 23, Pauline was housekeeper and cook, bookkeeper and clerk. It was an agreeable little household. Pauline and Theo, her uncle, and his mistress. If Pauline was prepared to disrupt this harmonious arrangement, it meant other factors were at play, undercurrents of family politics to which she was not privy. She pulled a square of chamois up from the drawer of a display cabinet and sighed upon catching her reflection in the cabinet's glass door. If she weren't so short and didn't look so young, her uncle might treat her like an adult. It was her own fault, she had to admit, that she was careless about her appearance. She had worn her hair in plaits since she was small, and her blouses with their rounded flat collars made her look like a schoolgirl. There was nothing she could do about her features, the small nose, the full upper lip that gave her mouth a childish pout, despite the determined lines of her jaw, the dark curve of her eyebrows. She removed a jade horse from its shelf and began polishing. All the while, possibilities and consequences clipped through her mind like beads on an abacus. Uncle Louis depended on Pauline's skills, a convenience that spared him the extra cost of hiring an outsider. If he was willing to send her back to Shanghai and marry her off, then who would do her work here? The abacus beads fell into place. Theo's bride. There could be no other explanation. Louis, or rather the family, had set a date for Theo's wedding, and this time Theo wouldn't be able to wiggle out of it. First wife had arranged Theo's marriage years ago while they were all still in Shanghai. At the time, there had been no hurry to set a wedding date, since Theo and his prospective bride were not even 15 years old. The girl's family mailed them a photograph each year, which Louis put in a silver frame, replacing the previous. Each time his father handed it to him, Theo dutifully studied the sepia-toned image that gazed out from the picture, his future bride and her unsmiling features, eyes solemn beneath long, blunt-cut bangs. Her pose varied, sometimes standing, sometimes sitting. One year she sat with ankles crossed, her feet, in their elaborately embroidered slippers prominent, almost thrust forward to show they were not bound. I told your mother to choose someone from a more progressive family, Louis said, taking the frame back from Theo. I said to her, the girl must be able to wear European-style shoes and boots, walk on European streets. She will be living in Paris after all. After Theo graduated from lycée, Louis would take him home to Shanghai for the wedding. But when Theo turned 18, and as his wedding date neared, he enrolled at the Sorbonne. He refused to get married until he'd finished university. Louis telegrammed Grandfather Deng for a postponement, and Grandfather agreed. In his final semester of university, Theo refused to marry again, this time because of the war, which was in its third year. The Allies needed to free up more working men to fight, and to do this, they were bringing thousands of Chinese laborers to England and France. Theo heard they didn't have anywhere near enough translators. But China is a neutral country, his father said. There's no need to put yourself in danger. I would be a translator, father. That's not dangerous. Your first duty is to your family, Louis said, to help me run the store, to live where it's safe. Paris is safe. The Germans haven't bombed us in over a year. I doubt they've given up. Theo's voice betrayed his frustration. And in the meantime, half my classmates have enlisted. I must do something. As soon as Theo graduated, he signed up with the British Army's Chinese Labor Corps. The French contract is for 5 years, father, Theo said, but the British one is only for 3. So I took the shorter option. On the day Theo left for the train station, Louis didn't go with him. They hadn't spoken in days, not since Louis sent a telegram to Shanghai apologizing for this latest delay to Theo's wedding. Pauline was allowed to walk with Theo, but only as far as the end of the Rue de Lisbonne. She was more than a little angry with Theo, and their parting had been stilted and rather formal. Now, there's no need to scold me further in writing, he said, a smile crinkling up his eyes. I know you're upset with me, but never fear. Just seeing your letters will make me miss Paris. I'm angry with both you and Henri, she replied. I blame him for encouraging you to join the Chinese Labor Corps. Don't blame Henri, Theo said, a grin breaking across his face. Please give me some credit for making bad decisions all on my own. The smile dared her to stay angry, so of course she couldn't, and laughed. They rarely showed affection with hugs or kisses, as the French did, but now she lifted a hand to his cheek, and he put his arm around her for a brief embrace. Then he picked up his valise and crossed the street, each hurrying step evidence of his impatience to get to the Gare du Nord and the train bound for Noyelles-sur-Mer. He turned briefly to look over his shoulder and said something she couldn't hear over the rattle of a passing wagon, then flashed his easy, confident smile and continued walking away. Theo, tall and straight in the early summer sunlight, in a suit of blue serge, so handsome with the brim of his straw boater tilted just so. He had been gone for 18 months. But now Grandfather Deng was dead, and Uncle Louis's older brother was family patriarch. Unlike Grandfather, he wouldn't indulge Theo's whims. Pauline sighed and gave the jade horse a final rub with the chamois, picked up a jade rabbit and began buffing its rounded haunches. She didn't doubt that as soon as Theo's contract ended, his father would have him on a steamship back to Shanghai. Then Theo would bring his wife back to Paris to help run the store. As for her, if all went according to the plans in her uncle's letter, she would be in Shanghai by springtime, shackled to a total stranger. Her future husband wasn't the only concern. If her in-laws were difficult to please, every day would be a misery, especially if she didn't manage to bear sons. She had witnessed this for herself while still in Shanghai. I could never live in China again, Pauline once told Denise. The women in our family aren't allowed to speak to men who aren't relatives, and they only go outside the walls of the home to pray at a temple or to visit family. Surely not all families are like yours, her uncle's French mistress said, lifting an eyebrow. Denise was right. The Dengs were exceptionally old-fashioned, which meant that when it came to marriages, they preferred in-laws of similar outlook. Pauline was sure that first wife would go out of her way to pick her an extremely traditional husband. She couldn't go back to China. She just couldn't. Not when she was free to stroll anywhere in Paris, shop at the markets, or wander through museums. Free to drink coffee and chat with Theo and his classmates. Compared to Paris, the restricted life of the inner courtyard was as good as live burial. How could your uncle not understand that? How could he not care? He didn't have to care, she reminded herself. It was her duty to obey because she owed him her life. After her parents died, Louis had brought Pauline into his household when he could have discarded her at an orphanage. She couldn't refuse her uncle's wishes, but perhaps she could find a way to change his mind, to let her stay in Paris and keep working at the store. She locked the jade animals back inside the display cabinet, then trudged up the back staircase, past their apartment and up the next flight of steps to Denise's flat. Louis would be home soon, his ship docking at Marseille after a month-long journey from Shanghai. Then another day on the train to Paris. His letter had said that first wife and the matchmaker hoped to send news of a suitable match shortly after he returned to Paris. A telegram confirming that all the negotiations were complete and a marriage contract signed for Pauline. She stopped and sat down heavily on the stairs. The Dengs prided themselves on always meeting their obligations. As merchants, their reputation depended on it. To revoke a contract of any sort was unimaginable. Once her marriage contract was in place, there was no going back. Her uncle would lose face with the family, not to mention her prospective in-laws if she refused to obey. Gossip would get out to the Deng's friends and business associates. She couldn't do that to him. Her uncle could put a stop to the matchmaking, but only before the arrangements were final. If only she could persuade him to change his mind. But Louis wouldn't listen to her pleas. She knew that. She was only a girl, and an illegitimate one at that. Theo, however, was a different story. Louis indulged Theo as much as Grandfather Deng had, treating him almost as an equal, the son, who would inherit La Pagode. If only Theo were here. If only she knew where to send him a letter. Normally, he wrote every month. His last note mentioned that his unit would be moving to a new location and not to write back until she heard from him again, which she would as soon as he was at the new camp. But it had been more than a month now. Theo would speak to his father on her behalf. She knew he would. All she had to do was go to the Western Front and find him.
That's such a great ending. Perfect. Beautiful. Thank you. I find it fascinating learning about all the different cultures and going back into traditional Chinese. It's just so I don't know, for me it's a magical culture to look at, especially, and you said in there that some of your ancestors encountered dragons, ghosts, and immortals. There's so much mystery and so much, I don't know, it's delicious history. So I'm part way through the book. I have not finished yet, and I'm already in that world. It's beautiful. Thank you.
I just, this is my first book that does not contain elements of fantasy. My first three did, and I was because it was set in China and because it drew from family stories that my father told me when I was a little girl. I don't know, the supernatural just kind of knows their way into the novels, right?
Yeah,
But
definitely.
this one I think is a little bit more serious. It's set in World War I France, and honestly, I just didn't see how the spirit guardians of China would make their way from China to the Western Front, so I just left them out. It just didn't seem to fit, right?
No, I don't see any of those dragons over the battlefield. Doesn't seem right. Although that would have been helpful. It would have been very helpful to have them there.
Yeah.
I know I know nothing about Chinese history, but everyone that's watching this knows I knew nothing about Canadian history before I started doing what I do. So that's the greatest thing about historical fiction, isn't it? We're learning and falling in love with the cultures.
You know what, Genevieve? I was educated at Western schools all my life. So the bits of Chinese history I knew really came from my parents when they talked about what life was like during the Second World War and, when they were refugees in Shanghai and so on. And, just bits and pieces. And like you, it wasn't until I started having to do research into Chinese history that I really started to understand a lot more. So, for example, when I wrote the Library of Legends, it was because my father had been like a student refugee, and he and his classmates had walked their way across China to escape the invading Japanese armies. And I knew this, like, because this is what he told me. But, to actually do the research and read the memoirs of other university students, it was so much validation, right? And I just found I was just kicking myself because my father's gone now, like both my parents are gone. And it was like, why didn't I ask them more? Why didn't I spend more time, finding out what life was like? Because it was a different world, just a generation away, but it was a different world. Yeah.
Yeah, and so many voices now are gone. It's so sad. I know that I've read memoirs and listened to interviews and everything, but to sit down, uh, if I could have sat down with my grandparents and had a long talk and actually listened, then that would have been great.
But we didn't know, right? We didn't know we would be doing this.
That's right. Oh, you mean I got to remember and make it creative? Well, I'm loving it, and I love that it's taking me, the whole historical fiction genre taking me everywhere. I've been to India, I've been to Africa, I've been all different places just because of historical fiction. But I've only been sitting right here. Did you go to China for any of the research or
I did not specifically for my books, but I've been back to China twice. And fortunately, once it was in the early 80s, when China was still, looking like old traditional China. And then I went back in the 2000s and boom, it was so modern, it put Vancouver to shame.
wow.
All the modern buildings and the high-speed trains and everything. And I took a lot of pictures. So I was able to draw on those trips to try and imagine what the little towns were like. Yeah. And then for this novel, for the Porcelain Moon, I was planning to go to France because, you know, Noyelles-sur-Mer is where the Chinese Labor Corps was headquartered. And then, of course, COVID came along. And I even tried hiring a grad student from the University of Paris, hoping that she could travel to Noyelles-sur-Mer and, you know, look at, you know, what the little town museum there. And she emailed me back and she said, you know, the deputy mayor says the town hall is just completely shut down. No one can get in there, like no one's going to work at all. So anyway, I gave up on that. But you know, the nice thing, I'm sure you found this, but the nice thing about having written a couple of books is that when you approach the experts in the topic and you say, I'm doing research for my next novel, you have some credibility and they do actually answer your emails. So I got a lot of help from the curator of the Belgian museum. It's called In Flanders Fields. And so he has actually written a couple of theses on the Chinese Labor Corps. And yeah, it was really, really, really helpful that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that. I know the feeling of saying, because I remember in the beginning when I wrote, when I was just starting to write, and I would write to people all over the world and asking for help, and nobody calls you back when you're starting, but you flash a little card, and there you go. It's been really beneficial to me for sure. I was just speaking with somebody in England the other day about it on an email, going back and forth about some of the things I'm researching. So I know what you
Yes.
mean. When you think about how you went back in the 80s and how everything was so new, do you think that any of these extremely traditional families still exist? Because Pauline's got a lot to deal with going through what is demanded of her.
Well, I can tell you that my father, everything is relative, right?
Yeah.
So as far as I was concerned, my father was like way too traditional, but he already considered himself fairly progressive for someone of his generation, you know? And my mom also, I mean, I was really shocked because they both wanted me to go to university. Like that was a thing. Everybody in our family goes to university. And one day I had my first job. I have a degree in computing science. I was working for a high-tech company and, you know, they were sending me to, you know, on business trips and everything. And she said, oh, you know, I don't mind seeing my sons work hard, but it really breaks my heart to see my daughter having to work so hard. And I'm going, oh, mom, I mean, why did you send me to university if it wasn't to get an education and get to have a career? And she said, I was hoping you'd meet someone with a university. Totally missed Travis. You know, for someone of her generation, even though she actually also finished university, she was qualified as a teacher. For her, it was like if she could marry someone who would support her so she could stay home and look after her children, she had done well. And that was just the way they thought, you
Right.
know, that was just the way she thought. And so, you know, I think that things are probably a lot less traditional now, but, you know, I think it also depends on where you live and where you're from. I think that in the countryside, it's probably a lot more traditional. I mean, you still hear about, well, families giving up their daughters for adoption because with the one-child policy back then, they just wanted sons. Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah.
You know, progress sometimes is rough, but sometimes it's very good. So at least that's done with.
Yeah.
So I wanted to move on to something else that you already know I want to talk about because I'm very excited because in the fall 2023, you have another book coming out. And this book is written in collaboration with Kate Quinn, who we all know here. And I'm dying to hear about this, what it's like to be writing, like co-authoring someone. How does it start? How do you work? When I write, I'm all by myself and nobody's allowed to talk to me at all. And until it's ready to be read, you know, and I don't know how do you think that way? How do you share that way? I want to hear all about
Okay, well, first of all, when Kate approached me, I think my first concern was, can we do this in a way that doesn't incinerate our friendship? because, it's one thing to have a successful writing partnership, but I did not want to lose a friend in the process, and neither did she. So we were a little bit, we were kind of cautious in feeling our way around. And we got together. So Kate right now is living in the Seattle area, just temporarily. And that was one of the reasons why she called me up, because she said, if we're going to collaborate, this is the best time. You're in Vancouver, I'm in the Seattle area. If we need to get together, this is the closest we're going to ever be. So we did get together face to face, and we knocked out a plot, and we put together a book proposal, sent it to our agent. So we have the same agent and the same publisher, which makes life a lot easier, right? But that's just on the legal contractual side. And she sort of hemmed and hawed and said, well, this is a great idea, but this and this and this. And we said, okay, back to work. And we knocked out another proposal and sent it into her. And she approached Kate's editor at William Morrow, because I think of Kate as the lead on this book. She was her idea. And away we went. And they gave us, and they were very, very excited about it. And they gave us this really tight deadline, which for some stupid reason we said, well, yes, we can do this. And then it got really, really serious, because I was about to work on my fifth novel, and Kate was like 40% of the way through her next novel, and we just dropped everything to work on this. So the reason Kate had asked me to write with her is because she has been wanting for a long time to set a novel during the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. And she said to me, but there's one aspect of the earthquake that doesn't seem to have been covered in fiction. And that is the fact that Chinatown basically burned to the ground. And nobody is really telling that story from the Chinese point of view. Like, what was life like in San Francisco's Chinatown before the earthquake and the fire and everything? She said, I'd really love you to write from the Chinese character's point of view, and I'll write from an American woman's point of view. So given that we were writing story from, two characters, we basically knocked it out in a spreadsheet. So that's my first thing. We were both very comfortable using spreadsheets. We have complete belief in the power of spreadsheets. So chapter by chapter on a spreadsheet, so that we would know how every chapter began and ended, so that it would dovetail. So, her character's point of view, my character's, her character, my character, the story moved along.
Wow, that's amazing. And well, that would not work for me, being a pantser in the worst way. I do not know how to be organized, but that sounds so great.
There's no other way you can do it when you're writing remotely, right? I mean, for us, there was no other way that we could do it. We had to know, okay, we had a tight deadline, so we couldn't pants. So and we did the research together. That was really fun. We went to San Francisco together, and we had like a week of doing, going to the California Academy of Sciences and the museums and exhibits, and old houses and old mansions and things like that. But the other thing was, when we were really in the groove, we were using Google Docs, and we were like uploading a chapter every few days. Wow. So it was like 4 chapters a week that we were uploading together, and we were just knocking it out. So
nothing like a
of course, and then of course you have to like read through the whole thing and smooth it out. But what I found was that I was being a lot more careful in my writing, because you talk about not showing your work to anyone until it's done. And she knew, and I knew, that the other person would be looking at that chapter.
Yeah.
So, this is, when we handed in the manuscript, it was like the cleanest thing I've ever handed in.
I was going to say, it's working that way, you'd be afraid to share, but then once you are sharing, everything would be better. It'd be so clean. You wouldn't have to keep redoing it, because you'd have 2 minds working on it and not just one.
Yeah, and you're cross-checking each other, right?
Right.
So, I'd be amazed if the copy editing, which has yet to come back to us, if the copy editing is gonna come up with anything really dire and horrible. So
I can't wait. That's the Phoenix Crown, right?
that's the
Phoenix.
Phoenix Crown.
I'm gonna put in a
September.
pre-order.
September.
Ah, can't wait. I'm going to put in a pre-order right now, and everybody out there should order that one. So, and then maybe I can get you both to come in and chat when it comes out.
That would be so much fun because I just told you how I felt about working with I just told you how she felt about working with me, but we're still friends, so that
There,
says something.
that's very good. That's good progress. You think you would do something like that again?
I don't know. I don't know because the audience the audience wasn't here, but I was telling Genevieve before we got on that like in September last September we moved from Vancouver to the Sunshine Coast, and during the move I was still working on the Phoenix Crown, and then we had to take a month off to go to Australia and New Zealand, which is where my husband's from, because we'd already bought the plane tickets before we knew that we were moving, and then came back still writing. And then like 3 or 4 weeks ago, Kate and I finally handed in our author notes for the Phoenix Crown. And then I had to jump straight into book launch things for the Porcelain Moon. And I just want to sleep for a week. So, I can't. And then, I need to start on the book that I was going to be writing before the Phoenix Crown interrupted it. So I think they're far ahead.
Yeah.
Don't ask me things like that.
It's funny. Some people ask, what are your hobbies? And I thought, I have no time for hobbies. I'm constantly writing something in my head. I don't have any hobbies. Do you?
And the thing I found about historical fiction is that I do so much reading now for research
Yeah.
that I don't read as much for pleasure anymore, which is terrible because whenever I pick up someone else's book, I'm so inspired and I'm so thrilled. And I think that's a great story. And what have I learned of the craft from the way this person structured her chapters and the story and everything? And I think I should really read more. And then, you get bogged down again in research.
Yes, yes. And some books I get through and I'm just captivated, but I have to put it aside and read another one because we're in a position, Janie and I are in a position, as are a lot of authors, where people ask for us to read and give little blurbs, little recommendation sentences or whatever. And what an honor that is. It's an amazing honor to be given. But boy, I gotta learn how to say no because I was just saying yes to far too many.
Yeah, when I was really inundated, I did have to say no, just because that everything in life is timing. What can I say?
That's very true. That's very true. That's a good way to say thank you for coming today, because there's the timing. Perfect. See how we dovetailed that?
You know what? And this is like, if I've got a few days of quiet, so you got me at just the right time. Because you said, how about tomorrow? And I said, okay. And then you said, how about today? And I'm like, do I have to put on makeup? Does this mean I have to put on?
And what did I say? You have to wear makeup, but pajamas are optional. So yeah. Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed chatting with you about this, and I want to chat with you all day long about more things, but we will do that again. And I'll try and get both you and Kate on in the fall. I think that would be really fun.
Yeah, we'll see how that works out. And thank you for inviting me. It's been fun.
Thank you. And everybody, here you go. Porcelain Moon is already out in bookstores. And look at that cover. Look at that. You have to go and buy that one now. All your TBR piles are getting bigger and bigger every time we do this. So, but I only talk about the best books there are. So it makes sense. Thank you so much, Janie. And enjoy a few days off.
Okay, thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.